true Saturn retrograde fashion, I'm getting this episode out at a little bit of a delay, actually kind of a lot of a delay, and I'll say more about that, but it just feels very true to Saturn retrograde, which is the bulk of what I'm going to be covering in this episode, is this Saturn retrograde that lasts from June 29th, 2024 through November 15th. And so I'm going to cover things like historical context, times we've seen in history a similar transit happen, and what was kind of going on at those points in history so that we can extrapolate to what that means for now on a collective or more global level, as well as always, what you can expect or how you can best work with this transit, this really like 4-month period on a personal level, because we're all impacted by these global events, but sometimes it does feel a little bit out of our control, right? So what can we do that is in our control related to this Saturn retrograde? That's what we're here to investigate today. And so first, I'd like to extend you a warm welcome to the Horoscopes podcast. I'm your host, Rosemary Holbrook. I am a Vedic sidereal astrologer and soon to be yoga therapist. Every time I say this, I'm like, I wish I could just say I'm a yoga therapist, because I'm offering yoga therapy to people. I have one client left worth of documentation to get submitted to officially be able to say I'm a yoga therapist. And what that looks like, really, why I say it, why it matters, is it's just a little bit different than, say, if you go to a general yoga class and it's general, right? Or you go to a private yoga class and it's still kind of mirroring your general public classes in style and scope, and it might be a little bit tailored towards your goals or like things you want to achieve typically in your asana or your movement practice. And yoga therapy is more like somatic lifestyle coaching, if I could describe it. And so that's where my skill set lies. And so I just find it really, really helpful. It's been really helpful on my journey, and as well for the clients that I've worked with over the past few years, to pair that, the somatics and the yoga and all of that, with what we're studying here with astrology. It just gives flow to it. It gives inspiration and newness and new things to investigate about ourselves. That's how I hope to help you use astrology here on this podcast. So welcome. And also a quick note, I usually try to say something about this. If you're not new, it maybe gets redundant, but if you are new, it's important to know that I use Vedic astrology, which typically most folks that use Vedic astrology use the sidereal zodiac. There are Vedic astrologers out there, people that call themselves Vedic astrology, that use the tropical zodiac. And the difference is the tropical zodiac is what Western astrology, or if you're newer to astrology, just astrology, you may have never heard of different kinds before. The tropical zodiac is what Western astrology uses. And again, there are some Vedic astrologers that use the tropical zodiac. I actually can think of, there's another Vedic astrology podcast that uses the tropical zodiac. Anyway, so it can get very confusing, especially if you're newer. The sidereal zodiac is pretty darn close to astronomically accurate. There are some differences, but it's close enough. And so that feels nice to me, that it's astronomically accurate, or a lot more so than the tropical zodiac is. So just try not to let that be a point of confusion. I know it can be confusing at first. And that's all I'll say about it today. If you have more questions, I'm open to hearing about it. The best way to get in touch with me is just email me, rosemary@yogiscopes.com. It comes straight to my phone. I usually reply probably from my cell phone. It's like you can text me. And I don't really do social media that much. But if I'm open to your questions, I love hearing from listeners of this podcast. So let's talk about Saturn retrograde. And as I was saying a moment ago, it's mostly what this episode is going to be about is that Saturn retrograde. But I can't not talk about the other things going on, because like I was saying, when we're going to look at historical contexts of, you know, past times in history when a similar transit has happened, being Saturn retrograding through this same sort of section of the sky, we're going to look at what was going on then. Well, it's not like the exact same thing or the same vibe will be happening this time, because at that time, which one of the times we're going to look at is 1965 through about 1968, because that is when we had a similar thing going on that we have going on now for like the next year or so. There was, say, Jupiter was in a different sign. Rahu and Ketu were in different signs than they are right now. So those are the other sort of big heavy hitters when it comes to like karmic shifts, is those other slower moving planets of Jupiter, Rahu, and Ketu. And so their movements are going to affect the subtle vibes going on differently than maybe what was going on in the 60s, or we'll also take a brief look at the 90s, which was the most recent time Saturn was in this section of the sky, which is Aquarius, sidereal Aquarius. So, and just, I don't know, I feel like this, I'm going to share a personal example because this feels like a good way to paint a picture of like what's going on a more personal scale. So, on June 29th is when Saturn went retrograde. And on June 23rd, which was the Sunday before, June 29th was a Saturday, June 23rd was a Sunday. On June 23rd, my daughter broke her arm. And I'm not saying that to like try to garner sympathy. Like, she's fine. She's got a cast on. It's pink and she loves it and it's cute and she's fine. But I had to take the week off with her because she couldn't go to her preschool while she had the splint on before she got her real cast. And she couldn't get her real cast until they wait like a week so that the swelling can go down if there is swelling. And like, she's really like been fine the whole time. So I'm not saying that to like, you know, make y'all worry about her or whatever. Like, she's fine. Kids break arms. Like, life is life. But what that created and what I've been working with in my personal life through this Saturn transit this whole time, and this is what our journal prompts at the end will hopefully help you examine if you haven't already been, help you examine how this is affecting your personal life, and so then what you can do about it, right? So Saturn creates these constraints, and what I've been working with, like the major theme for me, my constraints have been related to my children and their schedules and their needs. That is my big, like, reality check, I guess. And that's what we'll talk about a lot is like, Saturn in Aquarius has a lot to do with your long-term goals, and your constraints that Saturn is bringing are the things that change your approach or give you that reality check of like, is your long-term goals or your approach to those long-term goals, is it feasible? Is it realistic based on whatever constraints you have going on? And for me, my constraints is, my children need me, like they need me. And there's been just always something with childcare, with like, you know, one of them gets sick, one of them breaks an arm. Like, it's just, these things happen. And I used to let it stress me out a lot more and get all out of sorts about it. And over time, I have just learned to adapt and live within those constraints and still try to find a way to achieve my long-term goals, knowing that that's going to be the constraint. So I bring that up to say it's possible that you have something in your life that you're striving towards, working towards, and you have this constraint or this thing that gets in the way, and you can't, and that's Saturn, right? That's what Saturn does, and we'll talk more about that. And you can approach that one of a few ways. You can approach that by either saying, this is just, I can't achieve that long-term goal because there are constraints, because there are things getting in the way, there are obstacles. And you can say, I just can't do that because of these obstacles. Or you can get all out of sorts about it. You can let it emotionally dysregulate you. Like, I'm saying that because I've been there, right? Or you can take a realistic look at, like, okay, in the reality of my life, going back to that example, I am the one that has to take off work when something happens with my kids' childcare, right? And you can just try to build your life and continue working towards your long-term goals with whatever reality is in place for you. And so I use that personal example because sometimes I like to say why, because I know some people do care, like, where was I for the last 2 weeks? And I know some of you don't. So for those of you that don't, hopefully the personal example made sense. For those of you that do care, that's where I was. So, so that's what I was trying to help portray with, so this Saturn retrograde, Saturn is in Aquarius, and I'm going to revisit some of the concepts that I covered on the Saturn in Aquarius episode that I put out in like December of 2022, because Saturn moved to Aquarius in January of 2023. And so this is the actually third retrograde cycle that we've had of Saturn retrograding through a section of Aquarius, because in the summer of 2022, Saturn briefly moved to Aquarius from Capricorn and then retrograded back into Capricorn. And then Saturn made its final move into Aquarius in January of 2023. And then we had a retrograde last summer through a different section of Aquarius. So all of these retrogrades will have a little bit different flavor because they're through different nakshatras, through different portions of the sign, if that makes sense. But the overall theme of all of them is, like, what reality checks are you getting in the way of your long-term goals? If I could sum it up in a sentence, right? And so this particular one is this retrograde. I'm saying this retrograde is moving through the nakshatras of Purva Bhadrapada and Shatabisha. Okay. And so those two nakshatras, Purva Bhadrapada, just quickly in like a little bit of a summary, is it spans from Aquarius into Pisces a little bit. Saturn's not moving into Pisces this time. Won't move to Pisces until next year. And then it will not retrograde back to Aquarius anymore after this retrograde period that lasts through November 15th. And when it moves on to Pisces next year, it's not coming back. So, the reason I say that, though, is because when a nakshatra bridges two signs, it does have typically some of the qualities of both of the signs that it occupies, or both of the signs that it bridges over. And so Purva Bhadrapada is ruled by Jupiter, and it translates to the former one who possesses lucky feet. So we'll unpack that a little bit, like what that means, right? But the vibe, though, for really this whole time, this whole retrograde period, the whole Saturn in Aquarius period, is grounding. If you ever have issues with Saturn, the advice, I guess, or like the most common remedy suggested is to connect to your feet. And so, or to walk barefoot on the earth. And hopefully I'll help make that make more sense. Pisces in the chart, in the body, is the feet. Pisces, the sign, has connections to the feet. Aquarius is the lower legs. And this is something that I like to tell my students often. I used to lead hikes for a living. I used to take people out, and we'd hike to somewhere beautiful. I live in the Appalachian Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina, and we'd hike somewhere beautiful, like to a waterfall or a mountaintop, and we'd like usually do meditation on the way, do yoga out there somewhere in the woods or whatever. And I would wear these boots that came just above my ankle, and they were insulated, and so they kept my feet dry. On the waterfall hike, there was like a little creek crossing, and I could just step right in the creek and my feet would stay dry, and people would always be like, "Oh, those boots must be great for your ankles." And I would always say, "No, they're not. They're boots like these are actually terrible for your ankles. They're good for keeping my socks dry. That's why I wear them, is to keep my socks dry. But what's good for your ankles is connecting to your feet and strengthening through usually like balancing on one leg. We do a lot of that in the yoga classes that I teach, because there's no such thing as a weak joint. There are just weak muscles and connective tissue around the joint. It's not like the joint, the bones themselves that are weak. It's the muscles and soft tissue and connective tissue around a joint that makes it weak. And so what are the muscles and soft tissue around the ankle? The great majority of the muscles that control your feet extend up across the ankle and into the calf. So this is like a tangent, it feels like. But when we're talking about grounding, when we're talking about connecting to the feet, these two things are really interrelated. The feet and the ankles and the calves, right? And so that's being brought up in a bigger sense while Saturn is transiting through Purva Bhadrapada, because it bridges over Aquarius and Pisces. And so that's in a physical sense, right? And so I know some of you that listen to this podcast are also yoga teachers, and some of you, like I do, like to theme your classes around whatever's going on astrologically. That's actually how I got into all of this, into becoming an astrologer, because it just felt like it kept things fresh for me. It kept me inspired, and flowed really nicely for students. I have a whole big certification course about it called Astrology for Yogis, that I don't know when I'm going to do the next enrollment period. It could be September. It could be not until 2025. Who knows? So anyway, that's what I do. And so in your classes, you might connect to the feet and lower legs and standing on one foot and balancing. And just so you know, strong ankles incorporates the feet and lower legs, and they're interrelated. So that's a physical sense. And hopefully that tangent was helpful. Let's get back to what else is being brought up by this Saturn retrograde. So what makes it unique from any other Saturn retrograde and all of that kind of stuff. So then later on in the retrograde, I actually did not make a note of the exact date because I don't think it's that important, honestly. The exact date of when Saturn will retrograde back into a different nakshatra, which is Shatabisha. So Shatabisha it translates to the 100 healers, or 100 physicians. So the idea of Shatabisha is that you have the capacity of 100 healers or 100 physicians within you already. And I love that. I have like 3 or 4 placements in that nakshatra, including my my moon sign, and Saturn. So I'm really with that. That's like a big thing that I hope to communicate in all of my work, is that the power for healing is not within anything external to you. It's not within the astrologer or the yoga teacher or the doctor or the chiropractor or the massage therapist or the Ayurvedic practitioner or whatever that you go to. The power for healing yourself lies within you, period. And hopefully anybody that you work with will help unlock that within you. But the problem is, I've experienced this with, like, I'd say, almost everybody that I have seen for yoga therapy, for astrology readings. They're so enmeshed in this culture that we exist within, especially in Western countries, Western medicine, where that paradigm is really prevalent. And so this same paradigm exists for chiropractors, massage therapists. The healing lies within their hands. And so I get people coming to me where I'm like, I'm trying to put the healing into your hands. I'm trying to help you uncover that and unlock that within yourself. And I still get people coming to me where they're like, just tell me what to do. Like, you're the expert. I'm like, no, you've been living in your body longer than I've been doing this. You are the expert, right? And so that's the idea of Shadabisha. And so with Saturn retrograding there, it's a good time to uncover any blocks that you might have around that, any blocks that you might have around unlocking your own healing that exists within you. And so that's just a quick little synopsis of what these two nakshatras mean where Saturn is retrograding, and hopefully the rest of the examples that I provide, like the historical context and the journal prompts. I'll recap all of this before I tell you some yoga practices and some journal prompts to help you during this time. But hopefully the historical context that I'm about to give you, the historical examples of times when Saturn has been here before, will help color in like how this might play out and how, like, what might actually happen. And so before I do, just a quick another piece of clarification that I feel like I should have said earlier, but I didn't, is that, so I did kind of mention that Saturn represents your fear, right? It also represents your constraints. So the places where you hit blockages. And so fear could be a constraint. Your mindset, your way you're choosing to show up, often could be fear-based. That you're like, I can't do such and such, because if you really investigate why you're like, I can't do it, it might have to do with fear. If you're like, I can't do that because why can't you? Often it's like, because if I do, X outcome might happen that's based on something that's happened before. All right. And so often that's fear-based. And so hopefully the journal prompts will help you. The journal prompts that I'll share at the end will help you kind of tease that out and figure out if that's what's happening for you. But then also Saturn represents the fruits of your karma. And so I'd like to just remind you quickly that karma just means action, right? So like the laws of physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? And that's kind of the idea of karma, is like you're out here doing stuff, and including, inaction is still an action, right? If you like, I don't know, are indecisive and you keep putting the decision off down the road, eventually, in most cases, that decision will get decided for you. So that's an example of where inaction is still an action. It's still a choice, right? So Saturn just provides the fruits of your karma, which sounds scary, right? So it's like, sounds like, I think a lot of people get hung up with their like, oh, I must have this like past life stuff that I don't even know about, so I don't know how to address it. Basically, it's the hand you've been dealt, right? And what are you doing about it? Like, I'll say more about it. And so when the retrograde comes up, when any retrograde comes up, it's a time where those constraints and those reality checks that Saturn provides get harder to ignore, I would say. They get, if you've been trying to ignore them, or like just not trying to do something proactive about it, this is when problems flare up. And so when Saturn goes retrograde, it's a time to change your constraints. If things aren't working for you. It's a time to work through your fears. It's a time to try to make a solid plan and make good habits and good systems and good routines in your life to address the hand you've been dealt, and especially as it moves through Aquarius, because Aquarius has these connections to our long-term goals, to humanitarianism. It's a good time to make a plan of how you're going to move towards your long-term goals. How are you going to get from point A, the hand you've been dealt, to point B, your long-term goals, the places you want to be? How are you going to get there? How are you going to bridge that gap? And likely, in most people's cases, there are constraints. Like I was saying, my biggest constraint is my kids and the kind of mom I want to be, and how present I want to be for them. And that often feels at odds with my career and how I want to show up in my career. Those two things, that's my constraints. And that's what I'm figuring out how to work within, right? And so another note about Aquarius is also your networks. So your friends, your peers, your colleagues. And so often is during this Saturn in Aquarius time, your friends and peers and colleagues might be the answer to your constraints. So I'll say more about that. I just wanted to be a little bit more explicit about what might be being brought up by Saturn retrograde. And so one of the things that I covered, one of the big themes of this Saturn in Aquarius time, so just to remind you, is like Saturn in Aquarius is bringing up stuff, and Saturn retrograde brings up what's not working, right? It brings reality checks. It brings opportunities to change your constraints, to do better, to build new habits based on the reality checks that Saturn is dishing out to you. And it also brings up chances to work with your fears around maybe those reality checks. And so one of the major themes of Saturn in Aquarius that I really covered in a big way on the Saturn in Aquarius episode that it was like a year and a half ago now, was AI. And we have seen since that late 2022 time when AI was brand new on the scene and everybody was like scared shitless at first when AI first came out. And there's still some, mixed emotions around AI, but it has really like kind of seeped into a lot of places. And I saw, as I was preparing for this episode, and so that's why that's why I brought that example up earlier of like, I prepared for this episode the week of like before July 23rd. I had prepared for it because I knew I was going to record it the next week, and then I didn't because my daughter was out all week and it was all I could do to get my in-person classes covered, and that's what usually seems to happen. But also, just FYI, y'all, like I've deprioritized the podcast a little bit for the last couple months. It's more like I needed a break, and I'll say more about that. I was deciding if I wanted to keep it as a part of my life for quite a while, and I think the conclusion that I have officially come to is that I do, and so it's not going to stay deprioritized forever. But also, so during that time, I was just like, well, this is the thing that I'm just going to let fall to the wayside, is this week's podcast episode during that week. And so anyway, I was preparing for the episode the week before, and I had seen this article that said that by 2026, there will be this phenomenon that they called the AI Ouroboros. And so if you've heard of Ouroboros, it's like a snake eating its own tail, which to me is funny because that's not the same thing as Rahu and Ketu, but it's similar. It comes from a different like set of mythology. But Rahu and Ketu is an insatiable head of a snake detached from a headless body, right? Same snake. The head has been detached from the body. There's a whole mythology about it. I've covered it on a past podcast episode. And so Rahu and Ketu are involved here, and in a second I'll get there to how they're involved. And it's Saturn's conjoining with Rahu next year, and it's a big deal. And I've been talking about it over time, like since that Saturn in Aquarius episode, and I'll keep saying more about it as we get closer. But it's just interesting to me that this snake archetype got brought up. And so the Ouroboros thing is a snake eating its own tail. It is kind of similar to the idea of Rahu because it just goes around in a circle forever. It's insatiable, right? And what it was saying, what this article was saying, is that there is a limited amount of data. I mean, it seems unlimited. There's like a shit ton of stuff out there, just stuff on the internet, articles, whatever, like things that people have created, and it could be anything that AI uses, right? Written word, books, podcasts is one, art, music now is being used to generate new content with AI. But the more that I guess waters get muddied between what's human generated and what's AI generated is if you're basically feeding AI itself, like the snake eating its own tail. The title of the article was something like AI is going to run out of data. And so basically like won't work anymore. And so I don't think, so first of all, that's fear-based, right? We're like, AI is not going to work anymore by 2026. And it's like, oh gosh, should we just throw the whole thing away? And so this is the thing I'm telling you though, is AI is not going away. AI has been around longer than this big craze that was really brought up in a big way by, I would say, Neptune moving to Pisces, Saturn moving to Aquarius. Those are some factors. It's not just Saturn and Aquarius. There's other factors feeding into this AI craze, but Saturn in Aquarius is responsible for a lot of the fear around it, as well as the constraints, right? So this is a constraint, and I have full faith that it will be figured out by 2026. But that's the example, is that this Saturn retrograde is highlighting this new constraint that we maybe hadn't thought of before, that AI is going to run out of data. And then another one, I didn't actually grab the link and save the link to the article, but another headline I saw over the last week or two since I've been mulling over this episode is that the amount of servers and, like these big buildings full of like big machinery used to process all this data required for AI is really unsustainable when it comes to the amount of heat it creates, the amount of space it takes up, and the amount of energy it uses to power all of these servers. And so that's just another constraint that I am certain we'll figure out, or we won't, and it will cause other problems. And that's the idea of Saturn. It's like these new constraints are presenting themselves with this retrograde. And so that's a good example, is with this AI thing, that's a good example of what we're experiencing on a collective level with this Saturn retrograde. Is that's a major theme of Saturn in Aquarius, is AI and how it's changing everything really. And we'll continue to see that, and this retrograde is just bringing up new constraints, new things to work around, and I have faith that they will be worked around for better or for worse, right? And so now let's talk about some historical context of the first one I want to talk about is actually not the most recent time. So the most recent time that Saturn was in Aquarius before this time, was in like the 90s, like 94, 95. And so I covered that in more depth on that Saturn in Aquarius episode that I keep alluding to. Back in the end of 2022 is when I put that out. And so I'll say more about, like, you can look at what was happening in like 1994, 1995 to figure out what to maybe expect for this entire Saturn transit. But in 1965, we saw Saturn go through almost an identical retrograde cycle where it was retrograding through almost the exact same degree points. It was retrograding through the same nakshatras that I mentioned, the Purva Bhadrapada and Shatabisha in 1965. So I want to cover that one first because it is more similar to what we're seeing right now than the one in the 90s. It was through different degree points of Aquarius, which is fine. Like, whatever. I don't want you to get in the weeds about it. But anyway, so here are some things that were happening in 1965 on a global level when Saturn went through this almost identical retrograde period. The Voter Rights Act was passed almost like a couple weeks after Saturn went retrograde. And so that was actually removing some constraints around, it made illegal literacy tests for people to be able to vote, which it was a constraint that prevented largely people of color from voting. And we're seeing a similar thing going on now, where people are saying they want like voter IDs, right? We're seeing a similar thing going on where people are like, there's these constraints around voting, which is very humanitarian in its orientation, if that makes sense. Aquarius is these sort of humanitarian things like voting, like the ability to vote and participate in democracy. That feels very Aquarius, and changing constraints around that, and maybe even this element of needing to fight for that change is a very Saturn retrograde through Aquarius thing to happen. Another thing that happened in 1965 is the first U.S. troops landed in Vietnam. And so there was already like stuff going on in Vietnam, but it was like the war was heightening. And so that's important because I'm going to say more about when Saturn and Rahu conjoined in Pisces. The last time it was in 1968. Because we have this Saturn and Rahu conjoining in Pisces next year. And so we want to look at the historical parallels of that. So it was like when Saturn and Rahu conjoined in Pisces later in 1968, that's when the anti-war sentiments were ramping up. People were like this. There was specifically a headline that was like Walter Cronkite covered it and called it a stalemate, and that was like kind of the big or one of the big shifts of public opinion around the war in Vietnam. And so there's always war going on, like always. There always has been. I feel like that always comes up when I'm researching past transits. And so I think the theme related to this particular war is the Vietnam War was trying to like fight with South Vietnam against North Vietnam. And so it's kind of like getting involved for us in the US. That's the perspective I'm taking because I live in the US. Sort of like getting involved in other countries' conflicts. And I'm here talking about astrology on the internet. Like, I'm not an expert on foreign policy. Like, I don't have an opinion to share with you about whether we should or should not do that. But I do know that that's a theme that gets brought up. And so can we see that parallel in 1995 in the time that Saturn was retrograding through Aquarius, through a different section. It was retrograding through Shatabisha, but not Purva Bhadrapada. But anyway, in that retrograde is when the U.S. got involved in the conflict happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which there was like a genocide happening in that country. And so where it's basically like two groups in the same area or the same country fighting against each other, and the US is getting involved. And so that's a thing that's happening right now too, in a couple other places. So what I'm pointing out or hoping to say is this parallel is that we're getting involved during this retrograde and beyond. We might see that involvement escalate, and we maybe can see some resolution or maybe some peak happening at that Saturn and Rahu conjunction in Pisces next year. But like I've been saying, is there's some other things happening that change it, that make it different from these last times that I'm pointing out. But that is a theme that we're seeing come up, right? And so then another one happening in this last identical retrograde cycle in 1965 is the civil rights movement was really heating up in a big way. And so there were, if you just Google like timeline of the civil rights movement, it really kind of like started long before that. It started in like the late 40s. 1948 actually was the first event that I could find associated with what we would call the civil rights movement. And it went on through 1968, was like on this timeline I found. I think it was on like the History Channel or something. This timeline of all these events that people associate with the civil rights movement. But it was like there was one in 1948, another one in like 1950, another one in like 1955, right? And then so they were kind of like spaced out, and then the great majority of them, of the events that we associate with the civil rights movement, were in like 1963, 64, 65, right? And so that's when Saturn was in Aquarius. And yeah, so civil rights is like I'm talking about humanitarian, changing the rules and the constraints around this sort of like humanitarian cause is a very Saturn and Aquarius vibe. And during especially the retrograde period is when it really heated up in a big way. So it didn't start during the retrograde period, but that's kind of what we see is like these things, anything related to Saturn, it's a slow burn, it's a slow build. And during the retrograde periods is when we see things really like come to a head, if you will, no longer be able to be ignored, right? And then later, when Saturn and Rahu conjoined in Pisces, there were some tipping point events related to these things that were kind of brewing during the Saturn and Aquarius time, during the specifically this retrograde that's mirroring what we have going on right now. One being, so Saturn and Rahu were conjoined in Pisces from January 11th through June 16th of 1968. And I was like Googling major world events happening during that time, and the National Archives, which is archives.gov, called 1968 a year of turmoil and change. And so that's like, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like that's what we have going on right now is turmoil and hopefully change. And so some of the things that sort of characterized on a global scale that Saturn and Rahu conjunction in Pisces the last time it happened, which was 1968, was the Tet Offensive. So that was this like kind of surprising thing, I guess, that was the Tet Offensive. I'm not a historian. I'm just like an armchair historian, right? Just like I'm an armchair economist, armchair, whatever. For astrology, it's like we want to tie in all these things that I'm not an expert in, and I'm not trying to pretend to be. But from my understanding, the Tet Offensive was like, it was like Christmas, I think, or whatever. Not Christmas, but like, I'm butchering this, and I apologize. But the idea was, it was a day that they didn't think there would be any fighting because it was like a holiday, and there was this like surprise attack from the North Vietnamese. Anyway, this big surprise event that kind of changed perspectives of the war. And also, I just want to point out, unrelated to what I've been talking about of these themes of this time, is also during that time, the Mr. Rogers Show had its debut. So there's this culture of wanting to be a good person, right? Mr. Rogers Show debuted during that time. The culture of like humanitarianism, doing what's right kind of thing. So that was like part of the theme going on. There was also lots of events related to the civil rights movement kind of heating up. The Memphis strike, which was a strike of sanitation workers for better working conditions. There was Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Maybe not in response to that, but like kind of after that, the Poor People's March on DC, which was led by Coretta Scott King, and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and it cleared after the conjunction ended. But then a couple other things. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated after winning the California presidential primary. So what I'm pointing out here is that there are all these things happening of people fighting for different constraints in humanitarian causes, and equally people fighting back against that. And so all I want to say is keep fighting the good fight, and don't be surprised if it is a fight. And that's the vibe that we have going on right now too, right? Hopefully that resonates. Hopefully you're thinking of some things of how we have maybe parallels happening on a collective level right now. And then one other thing I want to point out, because remember I said right at the last time there was a retrograde like this in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. And then in 1968, at the time of the conjunction of Saturn and Rahu, the same president, Lyndon Johnson, signed the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender, or national origin in terms of renting or mortgage practices, lending practices for housing. And so those were some big ways that what people were fighting for kind of gained traction, or the constraint really changed in a big way. And so maybe you can think of ways that humanitarian constraints are being imposed and people are fighting against them. So as I was saying earlier in the episode, hopefully when you encounter a constraint in your personal life, in your individual long-term goals, or in those more collective things, you don't say, well, that's just the way it is, so that's the way it's always going to be. Hopefully you don't let that constraint get you all out of sorts. Hopefully you just work to change the constraint, right? If it doesn't seem like a good constraint. So that's the thing. That's what I'm hoping to point out, is that Saturn is all about constraints. It's all about, what are the limits? What is reality? What are the limits imposed by reality? And is that something that's worth a status quo that's worth upholding, or is it worth putting in the work to change that, right? So before we move into the sort of recap where I'll tell you what it's a good time for, what it's a bad time for, your yoga practices and journal prompts, I want to recap the nakshatras, the themes brought up by the nakshatras and Aquarius in general on an individual level. So hopefully all that historical context helped paint a picture of what this might be bringing up on a collective level, on a global level. But just to recap on a more individual level, is that Aquarius brings up themes of innovation, progress, humanitarian efforts, and social justice, right? Just in general. And Saturn retrograde is bringing reality checks, places where we need to try harder, work harder to change the status quo if it's something worth changing, right? And then it also, Aquarius has this freedom and individuality element to it, balanced with a sense of duty towards the greater good. So Saturn is very much like, what ways do you need to be dutiful and do your part to contribute towards that greater good? And so this retrograde in general might bring up challenges in maintaining that balance between your personal desires and those societal expectations. which might, especially during the retrograde, make you think about redefining your boundaries and your responsibilities. And so, like, for example, this is where maybe some of my feminist friends that listen to this podcast might have been like, well, why are you the one to take off work when, you know, because if you, maybe you're new here, maybe you're not. To bring it back to my personal example, I'm married. I'm in like a cis het relationship, you know, and I'm married, and there's some element of traditionalism in my marriage, right? Where my husband makes a lot more money than I do, and so in a short-term sense, it often makes more sense for him to be the one to not have his work schedule disrupted by the kid things. Whereas it was like this assumption that I always would. And so as we've navigated this together, those boundaries and responsibilities have shifted a little bit over time, where we found something that works for us, where I've worked to build a life where I can, but he also is more open to supporting than maybe it used to just be an assumption, where, you know what I mean, if that makes sense. So what I want to point out is that, like, here's the reality that we were living with, and I had to, within myself, consider this balance between, like, what I want to do and my goals and my long-term ambitions, right? And my duty to my family and these societal expectations around being a mom, being a woman, right? And so maybe that's coming up for you. Maybe something related to that is coming up for you with this whole Saturn in Aquarius time, right? Maybe it doesn't look exactly like that, but I just give the personal example to paint, like, this is how it's happening in my life. Can you think of where you are experiencing challenges maintaining balance between, like, what you want to do and your long-term goals and the carrot you're chasing after, right? And your duty to the people in your life, because I'm a big proponent of, like family's really important to me, and I'm not where, like, I find a lot of spiritual contexts seem to be really pushing this, like, asceticism idea, maybe, or, like, you know, if something gets in the way of your, like, spirituality, then, like, cut it out of your life. And I just think there's always a balance. Like, I think, yeah, my family gets in the way of my spirituality sometimes, right? Or so it would seem, but I'm not going to just cut them out of my life. But you have to find what works for you. You have to look at your constraints, your desires versus your, you know, societal expectations, your duty to, I don't know, your friends, your dog, your cat, your people at work, your mom, whatever, your partner, I don't know, like, where is that balance for you? And that's what this retrograde might be bringing up. And what that requires is considering your responsibilities and setting boundaries, right? And yeah, so that's all I'll say about that. To get a little bit more specific, to recap the nakshatras. So first, Saturn is retrograding through Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra. Purva Bhadrapada, because it is symbolized, I think I said the translation earlier, I didn't say this symbol. The symbol is the feet of a funeral cot, right? So specifically the front legs, which is like where your feet go, right? The legs of the bed, but on the side where your feet go on the funeral cot. And so because there's this funeral cot symbolism for Purva Bhadrapada, the vibe I like to call it is like feet to the fire, like where your feet being put to the fire. And that is like a saying, but it's the idea of the idiom or the saying is when you when somebody holds your feet to the fire, they're asking for a transformation out of you, right? And so there's this intense transformational energy driving profound inner changes, this like shedding of old restrictive patterns, especially patterns of your own behavior, because we're talking about all this collective stuff. Your own behavior is all that you have control over, really, when it comes down to it. So it's like, what are you going to do about it? with your own behavior and patterns. And so the retrograde through the Purva Bhadrapada portion brings a focus on spiritual growth, pursuit of higher knowledge because of being ruled by Jupiter, with an undercurrent of the Saturn vibe. The Saturn retrograde is facing fears and doing shadow work in terms of that spiritual growth. Like that's what kind of spiritual growth we're talking about. And so this retrograde, it wants to encourage you to recommit to your long-term goals, and the perseverance that it requires to achieve them despite obstacles. So that's kind of what I was saying with like more personal example, but hopefully it's helpful. Like that's why I'm bringing it up is this has been a turbulent year for me podcasting. I was like really on a roll with it for a while where I was putting out an episode every week, and I took like 2 or 3 months off earlier this year. And what happened was Saturn transited over the exact degree of my natal moon and my natal Saturn in like February. And I got super burnt out. I got sick. I went and stayed in like a very remote cabin for my birthday, which was like right when Saturn was transiting over that section of my chart. And it just like, it hit me hard. And I was like, is this what I want to do? And having that reality check of all the responsibility that podcasting and doing this as a job requires hit me really hard, right? And so I spent a few months just resting and regrouping and deciding like, how can I make this something that works for me with my reality of my life? And so that's how it's playing out, is now that this retrograde is happening, I'm experiencing a recommitment to that long-term goal. Whereas earlier this year, I was like, maybe I'll let it fall away. Like for real. I was like, maybe I don't do this. Right. And so that's been kind of going on for me in my personal life. And I just share that because maybe you have something else too, because of this Aquarius connection to long-term goals. Maybe there's something where you're like, you might have had a moment where you're like, I can't do this. It makes me think of that song Chronically Cautious that I think was like invented on TikTok or something. But a lot of people have done covers of it. And the line in it goes, making me question how much I really want this, right? That's being brought up, is like, how much do you really want your long-term goals in the face of like what it's really going to take to get that? Do you have the perseverance? Can you recommit? Can you find the stamina and put in the hard work to achieve your long-term goals and do the fear and shadow work, because Saturn's really going to be putting your feet to the fire during this first portion of the retrograde. And then when it retrogrades back to Shadabisha, the focus will shift slightly. It'll still be around those Aquarius themes we talked about. The focus will shift slightly to being more on healing, introspection, seeking holistic solutions to unresolved issues, right? And there might also be a heightened awareness of societal structures that need reform. That's what we've been talking about, is like the civil rights movement. All of that is like, what are these structures, these constraints societally, not really the best humanitarian. And that's what this Saturn in Aquarius is like bringing up, is throwing it in our faces. That's what Saturn does. It's like, here, do something about this, right? That's what Saturn is basically doing all the time. And what it's saying do something about just shifts. And so with it in Aquarius, it's societal structures, humanitarianism, right? And then Shadabisha, with the focus on healing, is we might see this being pointed, this vibe being pointed at healthcare, and those kind of structures around health and well-being, and the good Lord knows how many problems we have societally there. And I'll leave it at that. So there's also the vibe of Shadabisha. There might be a strong push towards isolation, self-reflection, encouraging this deeper understanding of personal limitations and strengths. And that was like what I was saying, what I was going through. If I have Moon in Shadabisha, I have Saturn there, and honestly, can't remember off the top of my head. I think I have Venus and Mercury too. No, my Venus is in Denisha, but Mercury is there too in Shadabisha for me. And so I have a lot of placements there. So when Saturn transited over those placements directly over their degree points for me. I just wanted to isolate. I wanted to reflect. I wanted to consider, what are my limits? Where have I been trying to live beyond my limits? And so that I actually have a journal prompt to help you with that. So just quick recap. This retrograde period from June 29th to November 15th is a good time for fixing things that aren't your fault but are your responsibility. So when I talk about Shadabisha bringing up this healing of unresolved issues, Purva Bhadrapada, putting your feet to the fire, especially in terms of like, what are your long-term goals? What are your fears and shadow work standing in the way of showing up as the kind of person you need to be to achieve those? Often those constraints and that the shadow work that you have to do, we could call it like generational trauma, is not your fault, right? Like your past lives and your karma that you enter this life with, it's not your fault. It's the hand you've been dealt, but it is your responsibility to do something about it, right? And that's the vibe of Saturn retrograde, is do something about the things that aren't your fault, right? Like it's not your fault, and that sucks, of whatever happened to you. But it is your responsibility to play the hand you've been dealt, right? And that's the Saturn vibe. And so it's also a good time for getting curious about your fear and leaning into it. So there is an exercise I have on YouTube. It's also on Insight Timer, I think, called it's under one of my playlists, and I honestly can't remember which one now, but it's the Do It Scared meditation that will help you get curious about your fear. Where is it landing in your body? What is it trying to tell you? And lean into it. Instead of what's often the common wisdom is like, oh, are you scared? Well, just don't be. Like, that's not true courage. True courage is being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway, right? So I'm not telling you don't be scared. I'm telling you to get curious about your fear. Where is it coming from? What is it trying to tell you? And what are you going to do about it, right? This retrograde is also a good time for finding ways to make your life simpler through routines and systems. It's like, how can you show up as the person you need to be, do the things you need to do by creating these systems to let your life function more like a well-oiled machine. And so this retrograde might really bring up things that aren't working for you, so that you can find a new way. That's the thing. So retrograde's challenging because it brings up things that aren't working, and that sucks and that's hard. But the best approach is to take that as feedback and do something about it, right? Make a new system, make a new habit, make a new routine. It's going to take perseverance. It's going to take diligence. It's going to be work. But that's what Saturn wants from you, is to pay attention, be really realistic, and do the things that need to be done and make the changes that need to be made, right? So just another tangent is like, for me, what's coming up is laundry. Like, I had to really change my system of laundry, of how I approach laundry, because when I used to be like young and single and I was only responsible for my laundry, I could do laundry once a week, but I had to come up with a system to stay on top of laundry now that I have a family of 4 and all of the clothes and towels and sheets and things that go with that. And there had to be a system that works for our family that everybody could be on board with to keep it running like a well-oiled machine instead of just stressing me out, right? And so maybe you have something like that in your life where you're like, it stresses me out. How can I make this better? That's what Saturn is asking of you, how you can make a routine or a system that might be different than your old routine or system. Stop trying to force that if it's not working. That's what the retrograde is going to point out, is ways maybe that your old routines or systems don't work anymore, right? It's also a good time for a reality check on your long-term goals and change your constraints if necessary, right? Like, through those, checking in with your responsibilities, setting boundaries where needed. It's a bad time for, during this retrograde, expecting things to be right the first time or quickly and easily. If you are going into this like, I'm just going to do this thing once and it's going to work, and I'm going to try to get all the information I need to only have to do this thing, in terms of probably towards your long-term goals, don't expect it to be quick and easy. Don't expect it to be right the first time. Expect you to have to tweak, because you're going to have to tweak and reimagine and rethink and retry throughout this entire retrograde time. So it's also a bad time for shortcuts, procrastinating, or trying to take the easy way out. Like, just if I could tell you like one piece of advice for every day of this retrograde period, is do something that future you will thank you for every day. What is the one thing it's going to change every day, but can you do one thing every day, make it a practice to do something that future you will thank you for? And so, for example, can you stop and get gas on the way home instead of putting it off till the morning? Like, the morning you is going to be glad you did. Things like that, little things. Can you, I don't know, set your, tea out for the morning, or so set your clothes out. I don't know, whatever. Like, can you do something every day? It could be anything, something little, tiny, small, every day that's like a gift to future you. And just do that as a practice. And so that leads well into our yoga practices. I would say meditate and floss. And the reason I say that is, so that's the idea of that is dinacharya. Saturn really likes dinacharya, daily routine. And what I've noticed with myself is times when I'm going through a hard time, like say have newborns at home, or sick kids at home, or going through a period of grief, like these times where life is not regular, right? Like when there's hard, big life changes, the things that fall to the wayside for me are things like flossing, things that seem like I'll still brush my teeth, but maybe I don't floss, or I might still do yoga, but I might not sit to meditate. And so what that tells me as feedback in my own life is that when I'm meditating and flossing, is those are kind of like extra self-care things, if you will. They come after things like sleep, things like eating, things like drinking water and using the bathroom. If you're not meeting those basic needs, which there's a good chance that maybe you're going through a life thing that gets in the way of those, right? So it's something to strive for. Meet your basic needs so that you have the energy to meditate and floss every day. And that in itself is a good practice for the Saturn retrograde time, is like, what's getting in the way of you doing those things? And can you change your life around so that you can find your way back to that if you've gotten away from it? And then another thing is seva, selfless service. That was the title of the Saturn and Aquarius episode. I remember it was make yourself useful. It's like, if you don't do anything else, just things are changing. Like, for example, if you're worried about your job being taken away by AI, figure out how you can make yourself useful otherwise, because things will always be changing like this. And you can either bemoan it, or you can figure out how you're going to make yourself useful. And that comes through service. That's the idea of selfless service, or seva, that I want to paint. I think we get this idea of service of like community service. Like, I'm going to go do the soup kitchen thing. And that's important, right? But oftentimes for people that have like regular jobs and you're not like working in a nonprofit as your day job, we think we're going to go, I don't know, volunteer for Habitat for Humanity on a Saturday, and we're going to like take pictures. And like, maybe you do learn things from that, but can you make it a more like daily practice instead of this big thing that you do and it's like a big event, right? Of volunteering or something. Well, volunteering is great and you should volunteer, but can you make this idea of like, how can I serve a more daily, like, how can you make yourself useful? How can you see things that need to be done and do it without expecting something in return? Because that's what I think with volunteering is often there's like this transactional, like we're doing it to appease Saturn, right? Or we're doing it because it's a thing that you should do. It's a thing to check off. Can you make it more of a culture of your life to make yourself useful without expecting something in return? That's what I mean by seva, or selfless service. And then another practice is that fear meditation I mentioned. It's on YouTube. It's on Insight Timer. It was in the membership that I've shut down, but I'm working on something. It's coming back. Because when I shut it down, a surprising amount of people told me that they were sad about it and they missed it. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll bring it back. And that's one of those things. Anyway, so stay tuned. It's not open right now, but I do know that particular meditation is on YouTube and probably also Insight Timer under a different title. But it's a fear meditation is the idea. And then grounding, connecting to your feet and lower legs, that little soapbox I went on earlier in the episode. We don't wear hiking boots to protect our ankles. We wear hiking boots to keep our feet dry. Hiking boots are terrible for your ankles. What's good for your ankles, and specifically this grounding, is maybe standing on one foot, connecting to the muscles. What muscles do you feel activating up your leg? And can you feel like you're gripping the floor with your toes, that kind of thing? Activating your arches to ground, to connect to your feet, to balance. That is great for, in a physical sense, working with what's coming up. And so here are, finally, last but not least, your journal prompts. 1, what has felt like a consistent theme of my biggest struggle since January of 2023? Like I mentioned, for me, it's been this childcare and like my duty to my family and my long-term goals of my career and finding balance there and changing the constraints. So what is it for you? So this may be especially related to the house Saturn is in for you. And I'm going to send a sign-by-sign out for this via email. So make sure you're on my email list. I'll probably send it tomorrow, Friday. So email me if you want it and you don't get it. In what ways have I grown or stayed stagnant since then, since that January of 2023? So can you really take an inventory of what ways have you grown, what ways have you changed your constraints, or where could you potentially have more work? And so this next question will hopefully help with that. What realities have been nagging that I've either faced or not faced? What parts of my healing journey have felt like my feet are being put to the fire? And then lastly, what small changes to my day-to-day systems, habits, and actions can I shift during these next few months to face that reality even more? So look out for the email where the journal prompts and all of this and what house specifically this is affecting for you will be included. And please remember to keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars, and stay in the light. Until next time, take great care of yourself.